Hi, everyone. Welcome back into the Beau Monde Summit. We just wrapped up our first panel, which was Canvas Culture and Legacy. And I'm excited to bring on our next panel, which is Versus Visions and Voices. And this panel will be moderated by Tarisai Gombe. So I will bring Tarisai on stage now so we can chat it up a bit before we bring in the rest of our panelists. Hi, Tarisai. How are you?
Hello. Hi, Jennifer. Thank you so much for having me and for organizing this amazing summit.
Oh, thank you so much for taking part. And I know like all our sessions are amazing, but I
Yeah,
feel like it's only going to continue just like this is the climax. I feel like our
really.
our our Canvas panel was just a little taste of what to expect moving into the rest of the summit. But a quick intro for Tarisai. She is a production and advertising professional. She has years of experience both on and offset on reality TV shows, film, news, doc, and such as The Apprentice, Project Runway, Vice News and Showroom, and Spike Lee's Netflix hit She's Gotta Have It, and is currently working on her next film project based on the Zimbabwean liberation struggle. Wow. Um, I'm excited. I know that's always going to be an epic story that you're putting together, Tarisai. I'm excited for this panel. So I'm looking forward to seeing how you weave in your storytelling background with the rest of our panelists. I'll be joining us shortly.
Absolutely. I'm so excited to have these ladies on. It's Women's History Month. Whoop, whoop.
Whoop, whoop.
Yeah. I know the world is so crazy right now, but it's so important that we're here to support and uplift and talk to each other. So as we bring everybody on stage, oh, here's everyone. Lovely to meet and see everyone. We have Nasozi Kakembo, Nana Ekua Brew-Hammond, and Palumi. Welcome to the stage, everyone. How's
Hi,
everyone
everybody.
doing?
Good afternoon. I'm good.
It's getting warmer in New York, so it's spring, and that's the energy I'm coming with here. Super excited. Sun is out,
Yes.
completely different energy. So looking forward to this talk. But I will start by introducing you all with your very illustrious bios. First, we have Nana Ekua Brew-Hammond. Nana is the author of not one, two, three, but four books. People count them. She's the author of Blue, A History of the Color as Deep as the Sea and as Wide as the Sky. That was and a 2024 Texas Blue Bonnet Masterlist title and an NAACP Image Award nominee. Powder Necklace, another book called Relations, an anthology of African diaspora voices. And her current book, which is out now and you can buy everywhere books are sold, this is called My Parents' Marriage. This is fiction, guys. It's not about her actual parents, but it might be about yours. So you definitely want to pick it up and read it. Her work also appears in Accra Noir, Africa 39, and New Daughters of Africa. So very accomplished. You can learn more about Nana Brew-Hammond on her website, nanabrewhammond.com, and definitely buy her book, please. Next, we have Nasozi Kakembo, who's a creative director, author, and artisan advocate of the African Decor Edit, which I've been ripping through all week. I don't know if you can see the title. It's a bit blurry, but the African Decor Edit you can also find anywhere books are sold. I'm about to blow my tax return buying all the things. We
All
definitely
right.
with all the inspiration I'm getting from this book. So if you're into art decor, interior design, you definitely want to pick this up. Nasozi, as I mentioned, is a creative director, author, and she is also the founder and creative director of XN Studio, an interior design and product design practice launched in Brooklyn, New York, and Kampala, Uganda in 2011. Nasozi has over 20 years, okay, count them, 20, international development experience across 4 global regions, traveled across 42 countries researching this work, and she brings deep authoritative knowledge of her design and advocacy work. So we're really excited to have you, Nasozi.
Thank you.
Last but not least, we have Palumi Obasaju, who is a Nigerian British scientist and storyteller, like both sides of the brain here. I don't know how people do it. And she definitely does not like to be boxed in, clearly. She has worked on projects from Spoken Flames to the Church of England. Pelumi, which is her stage name, like Beyonce, was part of 2022-23 Poetry Transition Center Undertow cohort and the South Bank Center New Poets Collective in 2023 and 24. In 2021, her self-published book, Love Letters and Heart Ramblings, which I have here, also an excellent collection of poetry, which she self-published, debuted at #3 on Amazon Christian Poetry. Okay, so we have chart hitters here. She's currently working on her first full collection, and I cannot wait to read it. That was a lot of accolades for our illustrious panelists. And with that, I think we're ready to start with our first question, which is, and I will start with you, Nana. When were you born as an artist? I feel like there's always that aha moment or that mentor or that thing that you read or play that you saw, or what was the spark that ignited your love for writing and any other creative practice that you explored?
Okay. First of all, what a pleasure to be amongst you all. I am going to be listening more than speaking because I want to hear and learn from you all, but thank you so much. And that is such a great question. And the first thing that comes to mind is I am 12 years old. I'm in Ghana. My parents had sent me to boarding school in Ghana. I was bullied mercilessly by my schoolmates, and one particular episode. And I'll give you a little bit of a highlight of it. But basically, I had written a letter to my parents complaining about how miserable I was. I was like, "The school is dirty, and everyone's bullying me." And someone broke into my trunk and found the letter. So I come back from scripture union thinking all is well. And then I enter my dorm and I am surrounded by people waving this letter at me and shouting at me and, accusing me of all the things. And I am weeping. I'm like under my mosquito net on my top bunk, weeping. And as I was going through it all I could think was this would make a really good story. And that's when I knew. I was like, I need to write about this because this is so wild. And that's when I knew.
That's amazing. You're like basically turning your trauma into your profession. So thank you to all those girls that bullied you back then. Look at you now. They had no clue. Nasozi, Palumi, tell us your origin story.
I'll start. So I don't necessarily, I feel like, there were so many nuggets along the way. Part of me feels like I was born into this path. My mother is very entrepreneurial and creative and artistic, and my father, who is a medical doctor, is actually also very entrepreneurial and creative. Not artistic in the or creative in the artistic sense necessarily, but I grew up with those pathways as the norm for me. That said, I was still very much kind of defaulted to perhaps like a traditional pathway in my career and in my life. And, I thought I was going to either go on and, study architecture and become a famous architect and work in a fancy architecture firm in New York City. And that was going to be my life, and or work in international work in international development for like the UN or the World Bank. That's kind of what I envisioned my career and pathway to look like. But as I was actually going through those motions, I was being called to do something that didn't quite fit into any of those boxes, and as a result, reverted to what I had seen all around me my whole life in my own home and in my own family, which was to create my own way and define my own path. So ultimately, that's what brought me to Xen Studio. Like, I had a 9 to 5 in international development. I was doing the whole thing, but I was really craving for something more artistically creative and expressive in my life. Again, having studied and always been involved with the creative arts, but I had taken this very hard turn toward a technocratic policy advocacy life, which I did enjoy and it was fulfilling, but I was missing the creative. So I had to come up with something on my own. I had to develop what that looked like and define what that looked like for me. And then the writing came much later. But again, all of those were stories to tell. All of those product design collaborations and the travels for the studio and everything, like that is what became the story that I impart in the African Decor edit.
That's amazing. I like how you remained open, even though you had architecture in mind in the beginning, but constantly being able to think about pivoting in the moment and finding the right next move, not necessarily having the whole picture ahead of you to do that. So I really appreciated that response. Pelumi, for you, when did you know you needed to be on stage?
I think for me, I'm someone who ran from the spotlight and ran from stage, actually. So my mom and dad are creatives, grew up in a very creative household, and I've seen the behind the scenes reality of what it means to be a creative in this world. So for me, I guess I was not running, but I was just like, I also love science. I'm a nerd. Just enjoyed science. And I was just like, I really just want to pursue this. But I always was in choirs, orchestras, involved in art. I did art GCSE at school. So art was very much life for me. And pursuing science was like the new exciting thing for me. But then the origin story of the poet happened during university. A friend of mine was putting on an event called Black Girl Bloom. This was March 2018. And I was there encouraging my housemate to like exhibit her photographs. So shout out Turner if you're watching. So that was like in my final year of my undergrad / masters, and she's a talented photographer, and I was like, you need to show your work, all of that stuff. So I was just going there supporting my friends, and then there was an open mic sort of section, and then they were like, you should read your poetry, and I was like, no, please don't. But then I got up, phone in hand, and just like read off what was some poems from my blog. And that was like the start. And then people were requesting me, and it just organically unfolded. And I guess that'll be my origin story. So the girl who did that event, her name's Deborah, lovely soul. And she just wanted to also start a platform to empower. It was March, Women's History Month, so empower other Black women on campus, other artists in her way, and that's how it began.
That's amazing. You see how both friends and enemies somehow pushing us towards, from Nana's story from being bullied, and Pelumi was your friends that were pushing you out. So you never know who around you is actually pushing you towards your next blessing. With that, we can move on to the next question. I know most of you are all writers, but have you considered other mediums of storytelling that, could amplify your work? And in which ways have you thought to explore this? We'll start with Nasozi.
Yeah, I'll begin. So I have absolutely no background in film, but I'm a huge, fan and a self-proclaimed, perhaps aficionado, but because along the way of my book travels, because I'm a shutterbug and I photographed the majority of my book, I was also behind the scenes grabbing just, raw video footage, not with the intention of necessarily doing anything with it. Except maybe putting it on Instagram stories or something like that. But over the months of the book development, and in the same way with product development, when I'm creating collections and capsules, getting that customer feedback, or even the most like innocent and curious inquiry, like, oh, have you thought about making, potholders or something like that. That often informs, when sometimes the answer is no, but sometimes it will spark that interest in me to explore creating another product through a traditional medium. So similarly with film, so people have constantly been asking me, are you going to make a documentary? Like, this is perfect for a documentary. And so I've thought about it, and I created like a mini series from all of the videos that I had in my phone. I created a mini series on YouTube, and I think there are about 5 or 6 from different interviews and countries that I traveled to for the book. And they're about 1 minute long, and it's literally just like the sights and the sounds of the studio. There's no narration, there's no fancy editing, but it's so raw, and it really transports me, and it transports the viewers to the moment where I was capturing the book. So it's also a supplement. It supplements and really amplifies the experience of the book in the sensory sense. And so, yes, that said, film is, I think, gnawing at me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this would photograph so beautifully visually. And
Yeah,
if there's any folks in the audience who are producers or multimillionaires that want to find
exactly.
Nasozi's documentary
Hint,
on
hint.
African decor, her link is in the bio.
Goodbye.
Email
Yeah.
her, message her, all of those things.
All those,
Yeah. Palumi, Nana, any thoughts on this question? Have you thought of using different mediums to explore your art?
Yes, definitely. And I guess that's why I lean towards the storyteller in my bio. I actually see all of us as creatives, but we're just storytelling through different mediums. Like even scientific writing is storytelling and through a different medium. Strategy is storytelling through a different medium. And even like the inspiration behind my pamphlet, I don't know. I like to say it's a pamphlet with a twist, because what I did, so some poems have like QR codes, and something I found with people who also said they hate poetry was more the thing of understanding. So it really got me thinking, this is my science mind. Okay, what's the solution? How else can we present poetry? So it's written, and then some of them have either the QR codes linking to a visual representation. So the first poem, my best friend's youngest sister, I in a way commissioned her, and I was like, could you like come up with a visual for this? And she filmed it. She went and just took off with it and did a short film in response to the poem. And I sent off my reading of it. And then I have like my little cousin, she's not so little anymore, but she did some illustration on one of the poems. And then some other ones have audio recording, so sort of like podcast style, me having a conversation with people who inspired the poem and like a conversation around the topic. And yeah, little bits like that. So I love exploring different ways we can storytell. And for me, what's annoying at me is doing it myself, not just for the sake of just doing it, but there's something about that process of like engaging in different mediums that really stretches you as an artist and challenges you outside of your comfort zone and gives you a deeper appreciation for other mediums as well.
I will quickly just echo everything everyone said, because I really strongly believe that there is this idea that as an artist, you have to sort of focus on what you're best at. But I think that that can be so prohibitive to your creative journey. I think it's so important to tinker and be okay with not being a master in a certain medium. I know I tinker, I draw, I edit films, I do all these different things, and it doesn't all have to be for public consumption, but I think that it ultimately strengthens me as a writer. And I say that to anybody who is doing anything, just try, because it's going to pull at a different part of your brain that will ultimately enable you to be stronger in whatever it is that, is your sort of main discipline.
Thanks so much for that answer, Nana. And it also kind of yours and Palumi's response kind of speaks to the next question, especially considering the new creative landscape, right? AI, all of this Afrofuturistic language around storytelling. How do we move contemporary African storytelling forward while still honoring, its really storied history, especially in the space where we're moving into technologies that have no real language or basis of how to interact with African textiles, for example. Any thoughts on that? Pelumi, you're a scientist. I'll let you lead this one with your take.
It's very interesting, this landscape with AI jumping in. Some of the sentiment I've seen, especially in the creative community, is one of fear. And I also understand that, but I also feel very excited by AI because you can tell when art is AI generated and when a human being has done it, right? The machines don't have soul. We can get into an ethical conversation. The machines don't have soul. They don't have the histories that artists embody as they are pouring that into the work that they produce and push out into the world. So I feel how we can push the contemporary African storytelling forward is to go in boldly, right? Go in boldly with our histories, go in boldly with where we've come from. A lot of our storytelling is also oral. So I think there's a power there in terms of preservation, in terms of how we document these things that have often been passed down around kitchen tables and late at night. How do we pass on these stories in a way that the modern audience and even the global audience understands it, appreciates it, without fear? I think a lot of fear is around like appropriation, will other people steal? But when it's authentic, no one can replicate authenticity. That's my slightly optimistic viewpoint, but feel free to disagree, ladies.
Any disagreements on the table?
I don't necessarily disagree. I think I think how I feel about AI is sort of, I'm of two minds. On one side, I think of it as like the iPhone camera. Like, going back to this question, the question you asked before about, like, how we use other mediums. Like, I am not a trained photographer, so when the iPhone camera came out, it enabled me, who is not a trained photographer, to take really beautiful, polished photographs, right? And so I was still able to express myself artistically in a medium that I'm not necessarily, it's not my main discipline, but it gave me a sort of a new mode of expression, at a level that I wanted it to be. And I think that with AI, for people who are not necessarily trained as writers or gifted as writers, but have great ideas, it enables them to have access to storytelling in a way that they were limited before. So I think that's amazing and that's wonderful. And I think the challenge is that when you are gifted and trained in a discipline, I think that it can actually, I don't know, in some ways, inhibit your own creativity to use these platforms, because, as Pelumi mentioned, part of the creative process is the creative process when you are a creator. And so when you are sort of shortcutting that process by kind of feeding in certain aspects, certain kind of data for the data to return back to you, you, the creator who is gifted and disciplined in this discipline, are sort of not able to fully stretch in the ways that you are gifted to do. So that is my conundrum with it, because I really love the idea of this new tool and ways to use it, but I'm still struggling with it as a creative person, because I'm like, I know what it means when I've labored over something for 2-3 years. I know what's happened, and you can't replicate that, by doing it doing it the short way.
Yeah, I think a lot of us are having quite the moral dilemma with the AI space. And what worries me about it especially is the IP aspect of it. So Nasozi, for example, with your kind of work where we're dealing with artisanal artifacts that are incredibly rare and, come from a very specific village in a very specific town. And as we write the stories about how, these artisans or these processes or this art comes to life, how do we protect it in a world where, AI and ChatGPT has, and those kinds of spaces have opened up and are able to sort of take from those inspirations and call them their own reasons. That's always blows my mind, and it worries me to no end, especially with African storytelling and African art.
Yeah, I mean, this is happening so quickly and in ways where it's like I'm starting to feel like just when I'm starting to wrap my mind around how to utilize it in a way that agrees with my moral compass and my ethical compass, like another challenge or another potential challenge will pop up. And I'll just use the example of this past week. For the first time ever, I was monitoring my website traffic, like on the back end, and you can see it shows you where the source of your traffic, where are the links, where are people linking to get to your website, where are they linking from? And so it can be magazine articles, it can be Instagram, it can be from all over the internet. And for the first time ever, I was receiving traffic from ChatGPT to my website. And I don't know why. I don't know in what context, in what manner, but I'm very curious. But there's really no transparency for me to understand. Like, was one of my blogs coming up as a source for information? Was one of my products coming up as an example for? And then and how are they then using that info? What are they doing? What are they doing with this? So that's a big question mark for me. But at the same time, last night, hanging out with some friends, and some of them are more, technological advocates. And so when they asked this question around my book, something similar, and their default understanding of my IP and advocacy work went toward blockchain and went toward utilizing AI as a monitoring device and kind of as a checks and balances, because that is a significant part. And that is also something that I just started to scratch the surface on and wrap my mind around earlier this year, because, once you have the designs protected, and maybe we'll get into that later, like it's a constant monitoring process to make sure nobody else is out there copying the work, because you're then in charge of enforcing the copyright. So technology and AI does have a significant role to play in that, for that would benefit, and that does benefit the artisans and the protection of our cultural heritage. So, it's a fine line. We're still figuring this out. But, I'm trying to think about ways to integrate it. Again, what's in line with my strategy, my own morals, my own business ethics, which I set many years ago, and so I'm able to refer to those when any kind of challenge comes up or any type of tool. How does this correspond to the groundwork that I've already established as the center and the pillars of my work and my mission?
Nana Pulumi, copyright is a little bit more structured in the publishing space, but perhaps you can educate me. Is it being impacted at all by AI, and how are you navigating that as Pulumi, your self-publishing? Nana, I'm sure you have a publishing company you work with. How is that space impacting you?
Yeah, I mean, I believe HarperCollins just, or I don't know if they signed a deal, but are in some sort of agreement with a company that is enabling sort of AI. And I don't quote me, so somebody, whoever's listening, Google and find out the exact thing, but it's sort of like happening in real time. And a lot of people have questions about it. I think that it's a struggle because it's sort of like the same argument was happening when Google Books was surfacing, writers' books. It's sort of like if you're searching for something and it's the search result is in a book, like ostensibly for the person who's out there searching, that is information that is helpful to them having. But then there is that question of like, but this is someone's intellectual property. This was something that was labored over for many years. There needs to be a cost associated with it. I think that as a business or as an industry, we haven't figured out how to compensate artists. And I think this is just across all industries. We don't know how to compensate artists well. And so, and usually the business models behind it aren't that concerned with compensating artists well. And so I think that is, until we kind of get to that central question, we're always going to be knocking up against it. And AI, what's challenging about AI is that it learns from the creator and then spits out work that is either at the same level as the creator or even in some cases better, because it's amalgamating all of the other good creators' work. So it's a fine line. And I think that really the question comes back to how do we really value what an artist is doing? Because just want to quickly enter into what Nasozi was saying about just sort of textiles, because I work with textiles in my sort of other kind of capacity. I have a company called Exit 14 where we source batakari, which is a Ghanaian textile. And it is, hand woven, handmade, all of the beautiful things. It takes, years of apprenticeship to learn how to create it, etc. But it's very expensive. And so when you are working with people and artisans who are creating it, the production cost is so high that if there are knockoffs that are made and they're cheaply made, it comes down to the consumer saying, well, okay, I appreciate that this is a beautiful piece of art, but I don't have the money to really buy it. And so, yeah, I will buy this knockoff, or I will buy this machine-made version. And so the question then becomes, again, it goes back to like, what are we really valuing? Are we valuing the artist's work? Can we afford the artist's work? And what models can we put in place to truly honor and value that creativity?
Thank you so much, Nana. That was a fantastic response. And she runs yet another business. Like, there's so many things happening with this group of talented people. So my next question would be, okay, hear me out. I've been thinking of ways to confuse the algorithm, right? The AI algorithm as a creative. But most of us here are in the diaspora. We're immigrants or first generation in some capacity, probably speak a language or two or seven. But what do we think about writing our art into the future in our own local languages, in our own local vernaculars? I know all of us have English books, which is great, but being that we are the custodians of this art and that we've been mandated with, this responsibility of being the griots of our time, and, how do we write ourselves into that AI future in our own languages as a form of self-preservation, if you will? Like, do you have any thoughts on that? Have you ever thought to write a book in your mother tongue? Is this something that's of interest to you? Let's get a little esoteric with that one.
Yeah, definitely. So you mentioned I was part of the Poetry Translation Center Undertow project. So that was for Nigerian and Nigerian heritage poets and writers, and that really brought up a lot in me. So I like to call myself a receptive bilingual, or receptive multilingual. I understand a lot of languages, but in terms of speaking boldly, I still sound like a toddler. But I understand at a level that maybe my mom or my aunties are speaking to me and I'm responding in English. I understand, like, yeah, understanding's there on lock. So now when it comes to writing, yeah, that is where I'm pushing my pen a lot more and going deeper. During lockdown, I decided to take Yoruba lessons via Zoom, and that sort of started something in me. And part of the reason I also went down the self-publishing route is, especially being here in the UK, sometimes you may send a manuscript and an editor will see Yoruba and say, I don't know what to do with this, and it's no fault of theirs, but then it's also a very challenging thing for multilingual writers and artists trying to push their work out there. So I had to back myself. I had to learn on the job okay, how do I do this? Very much a crash course in parts of publishing, and I'm still learning. But for me, in terms of writing into the future, I'm particularly interested as a Yoruba writer and poet. How do I push the narrative forward with my poetry, especially from my unique experience as a Nigerian British 1.5 generation? That's another story for another day. Female writer. And a lot of my thinking and my practice lately has been about, like, what does it mean to write through the female gaze? What does it mean to write through the Nigerian female gaze? Also, I have a lot of friends from different parts of Africa as well, and like the lens is different. How we view things is different. We're not a monolith as Black women, and how do I honor that? Because there is that thing of, once you put words out there, sometimes people can generalize for a whole group of people. So how do I remain true to myself and my experience, but then also do it in a way that makes the audience or those receiving it understand that, yes, it's my experience. I might be lying as well. I might be a fiction, like a bit of fiction there. So there are all these tensions as a poet, because sometimes I'll deliver a poem as well, and it's not necessarily my voice, but because I'm the one delivering it, people assume it's about me. I just have to be all right with that vulnerability, and learning and making mistakes in public. So yeah.
That was a great response. Anyone else have a take on that? Do you feel like things get lost in translation when we tell our stories in English or French or, these other ways? Do we gain anything by potentially trying to tell them from a vernacular language that is closer to home? Nana and Nasozi?
Yeah, I have a take. And in short, I haven't thought about writing or producing anything in Luganda, my father's tongue, technically, because I don't speak Luganda. We didn't grow up speaking it at home necessarily because my mother is American. She doesn't speak it. But here and there, I would pick up things, small talk, and within our Ugandan community in the DC area where I grew up. But I think that's also at the same time what catalyzed me to explore other forms and other mediums to communicate my truth and my experience as a third culture kid, as somebody who firmly and very proudly holds on to aspects of my identity as an American and as a Ugandan, and really exploring the virtues of what it means to be that conduit and defining that for myself. So that is the photography, that is the book. And not so much that I feel like, in a sense, I mean, Luganda is a beautiful language, even the way that it's structured. There's nothing everything is lost in translation. Just, and I think this is so true for even other parts of other languages that I've come to learn through film. Like I even know a little bit of Yoruba from watching different, now that Nollywood films, and I've, in fact, even before they started coming on Netflix, we used to watch Nollywood in Uganda. Like there was a huge, when they were still on the CDs or whatever. So an even South African film, which in a single conversation, there can be 5 different languages happening in a single conversation. And I think that is so beautiful, the way that our people, and I think genuinely this is something that's characteristic of the continent. Of course, Africa is not a country, but this is a phenomenon that I've witnessed and experienced in all of the regions that I've been to throughout the continent. So I think that, and I believe that there's more than one way to communicate the virtues of our identities and to tell our stories. And I think that's also like one of the key attributes of this conversation that we're having as well today. So I don't strive to tell it in the language, but to tell it through my own voice and my own language. And I found that there has been, in fact, a lot of positive reception in Uganda. One of the first books that, even before my book came out, I sent some advanced copies to my family. And I mean, just the way that they were so proud to see our word and our work preserved in that form was really the only review that my cousin, one of my cousins, just sent me like a gushing review on, not even review, a gushing response, a text on WhatsApp. And I was like, that's it, drops mic. Like I've done what I've done what I came here to do. So there are different ways to receive our messages and to preserve them.
I will quickly add, I love this question, by the way, because I think it's sort of like a cat chasing its tail in a way, because when I think about, like with my novel, My Parents' Marriage, I really want that book to be in Ewe, which is one of my languages, and also in Akan, in Tree and in Fanti, because I want it to be something that I don't want to say older generations, but I think that there's something about it being in the language and expressed in the language that people who are in the context can appreciate in a way that is lost in English. That doesn't mean that I think that it is any less in English. I just think that I want to have that conversation with people who are in the context, in the language. And so I've been thinking about that a lot, playing with doing community theater versions, performances of it, and taking it to different villages and really having that conversation. Because I think that, when it comes to language, it's really a question of access and in some cases privilege. Because and even privilege is sort of like a dicey way to put it, because it doesn't mean you're privileged if you can speak English, but or you can speak a Western language. But if you and it's also generational. I think that in certain generations they may not need to access the book in a specific way. And so this question of translation doesn't even necessarily matter for them. So I think that these are all of the considerations, but I'll add one thing, is that I think that the future is dynamic translation, which is another way that maybe technology will undermine the work and the discipline of being a translator. But I think that that's the future, because ideally you want to be able to sort of create something, and wherever you are in the world, be able to engage with it if you can access it, So I think that's the future.
Yeah, I've been grappling with that question myself. I have a writer, anthropologist grandfather who wrote a book on the Shona people from Zimbabwe, all in Shona language, and it's one of my life's purposes. Or I want to translate that because I have nieces that don't speak the language, for example. So I guess for me to be able to at least have the blueprint in our native language that I then can translate into everything else felt like he left me a little part of history, you know what I mean? In a way that will be very difficult to duplicate because he's gone. And so many of our elders and our artisans and our griots and our storytellers are unfortunately moving on and taking their, gifts with them, because a lot of this was oral tradition, as we've mentioned. So it's something I'm very passionate about how do we pass on all of, their learnings, first of all, in their own words, in their own languages, because I think things do sometimes get lost in translation. And then how do we make it as accessible as possible to everybody involved? That way we maintain relevance, as we move forward as African artists. Anyway, tangent. Moving on. Can you tell me a little bit about some of the challenges that you guys have had as writers? Like, what is the biggest enemy of progress for women African writers in the diaspora right now? What are you guys like encountering in your day-to-day professions, personally? What gives? Share.
That's a weighty question. My gosh. Where do we even start?
Sorry, I bring it. I really do. I told you.
I know you brought it. I'll say just something quickly to get us started off. And it's for writing. It's for the total experience, I think, of being a Black woman in this world. But there's always this interesting assumption, and I feel like assumptions tell us more about a person than any other thing, the assumptions that they make or impose. But there's always this assumption that when I'm either introduced as a writer or somebody hears about it, like in a public, hangout setting, wherever it could be, the assumption is always um, that, and not that there's anything wrong with this at all, but the default assumption is that I self-publish and that this is like a little book that I just kind of made informally on the side, just a little thing, and then it's like, and then I don't feel like it's my responsibility or that I need to prove anything other to them. But when it then comes out that, like, oh no, she's published with one of the biggest, publishers and the definitive, illustrative design book publisher, etc., and like she got an advance and she went to these countries, then the tenor changes. But I'm like, oh, but you assumed that this was a DIY project again, and again, nothing wrong. In fact, I'm considering self-publishing for the next book. But it's interesting just the assumptions that are made at the outset about how we even produce our work. Why isn't the assumption that I've been working with a publisher and that I had backing and that I had support and an agent, et cetera. So that's something that I found has come up, throughout this first book of mine, this first journey that tells me a lot about some people.
I would say there are many challenges, but a couple of challenges. One is financial. We are not paid as much as our white counterparts or white male counterparts. And so even in listening to the panel that preceded this, I got so frustrated hearing them talk about the finances aspect of it, because it's always like, it's like the hustling, and that hustle is part of the process, and I think that definitely adds to the flavor of the work that we create. But it would be so lovely to be in a position where we could fully dedicate ourselves to the work that we do. So that's one of the challenges, that financial disparity. Then the other challenge is the cultural disparity, the response. Sometimes you create something and people don't like the apparatus that is there to receive the work is untrained to receive work that is not in a Western, tied up in the Western bow. And so they don't understand the work that you're creating. And so they either gush about it without understanding it, or they poo-poo it without understanding it. And it's very frustrating because if we're looking at a review or we're looking at responses as ways to grow as an artist, you're not really in conversation with someone who's able to give you a response. And then they're not empowering people who do have the knowledge to be able to respond critically in a way that is productive. So those are two of two of the main challenges that I think impact women who are women of color, women of color in the storytelling space.
Yeah. And I just want to echo what Nana said in terms of I'm very passionate about artists being paid whilst they're alive. Whilst they're alive. So that is something that is definitely part of my practice. Again, the business side of things, learning that. Also creative well-being. So the scientist part of me is my PhD is in neuroscience, and I'm very, very, very passionate about well-being. Things like creative burnout, things like how do you create in a sustainable way that you keep going, in a way that also is fulfilling to you as well as to your community. There's also an element of that in terms of competition in the space. Sometimes we think we're competing against the next person, but your missions are different. So also making sure we know how to articulate that to the people that matter. Sorry, something in the background. To the people that matter. And a personal tension for me, I think I mentioned this when we had our check-in, or like we met as panelists. I face a bit of like ageism. So for me, it's like sometimes people don't believe I've achieved what I've achieved because of my age. And there's an element of like, I don't want to be performing and trying to prove myself because I want the work to speak, but then also I want to be taken seriously. And there's an additional thing of navigating different spaces. So assumptions, like Nasozi said, in terms of in mainly British spaces, I'm sometimes too Nigerian, and in Nigerian spaces, sometimes I'm too British. But I'm both. I'm genuinely like I am both, and it's not a thing of discounting my Nigerianness or my Britishness. It's like the 1.5 generation thing is a legit thing, and that's another story for another day. But those are some of the challenges that I face personally. Yeah.
Thank you so much. We have maybe 7 minutes left, and I have a few questions from the audience. From Dominique, you all spoke about preserving your work, but I'm curious, how do you maintain self-preservation? It's a lot that you've mentioned, balancing being a woman, being a Black woman, AI, all of these very many things. But how do we preserve ourselves and our souls as artists while we try to fight off all these outside elements?
Yeah, I'll jump in. So creative well-being is a passion of mine. The power of saying no as a Black woman without further like explanation, boundaries in both professional, personal life, because our lives influence the type of art we push out, how we show up in spaces. So creative well-being is something I'm very passionate about. I'm going to plug a book that helped me quite a bit. There have been resources that have helped me, but I think one that's popular in the art space is The Artist's Way, and just like working through some of those exercises, taking yourself on artist dates. And it doesn't even have to be expensive. Things like taking pockets in the day, maybe on a commute in your day-to-day job, or just to ground yourself and pay attention to life around you can be life-changing. So mindfulness practices. So yeah, I hope The Artist's Way is a resource that you'll be able to use, Dominique, in terms of the start of maintaining self-preservation.
I'll quickly add, just be true to yourself, because I think that when you're inauthentic, it is really difficult to keep up the lie, and it's stressful, and it's energy taxing. But when you are being true to yourself, it's allowing you to sort of flow into spaces that maybe to surprise yourself constantly and regenerate yourself.
Yeah, you can't pour from an empty cup, people. So I definitely reiterate all of your responses on that. Let me look in for another question. Before embarking on any literary work or creative project, what informs your process? Are you going based off of absence or necessity, function, emotion, something happening in the environment at the time? How do you all approach each of your individual disciplines?
I'll start by saying essentially what brought me to kind of the impetus for me to write this book was an absence of our story and artisan stories being told in a robust and comprehensive and delicate manner. I wasn't finding that, and I was seeking that, and I hear this from so many creatives and artisans and writers. Like we create the thing that we wish existed, and so that's not always the place that I start out. But in this instance, for the book in particular, it was, and I realized. Oh, it doesn't exist because I'm the one who has to tell this story. I'm the one I'm the one who can bring it forth, and it has been my life's work. So in this case, it was very clearly me looking around and wanting, and also knowing that again, my customers, my clients were also seeking that story. They were the ones who they would see my high level of production, like catalogs that I would put together from my collections, and which I would always narrate and try to put as much information in a caption as I could, for example. And they would look at it because I used to actually print out physical copies, and they would say, if this were a book, I would buy it. And it took me still many more years for it to really register that I had all of it in me already. But it was from that absence, and also listening, being receptive to the voices that I trust, and to my clients and customer base who have somehow, like, I have an incredible customer and client base. I love, I've maintained very healthy, positive relationships in that space. So I learn a lot from my customers and my clients, in fact.
I will quickly add that as creators, I try to remember that whatever I create, I'm going to be engaging with it for a very long time. And so I think what separates the thing that like I kind of lose steam in creating versus the thing that I'm like, I want to work on this forever. And then when I think what separates it is the passion. So I guess emotion is the answer. Like, am I going to still be interested in this 10 years from now? Yes, then yes. This is what I need to sort of invest my time and energy into.
For me, it's all of the above, but especially as a poet, emotion, yes. And I'm particularly passionate about emotional and relational intelligence. So oftentimes when people see the title of my book, they'll be like, I think someone said it here. Who broke your heart? But it's that whole thing of like, when we think of love and when we think of love poetry, we immediately go to the romantic. But then I was like, but there's love in so many different ways. The love of a parent and a child, the love of like a brother and sister, the love between friends, the love of self, and if you're a person of faith, the love of God. Like, how do we articulate all of these elements of love and encapsulate? And I think that's something that fascinates me. That's the passion for me, like the different ways we can articulate this. So yeah, all of the above.
I think we're going to end on that note. We will end on the love note because that was perfect way to close out this panel. Thank you so much, Palumi, Nasozi, Nana. This was such a great conversation. I'm energized for the rest of the weekend. It's warm outside. I'm going to go get some brunch and mimosas. Come join me if you will.
Oh, I wish.
Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. Jennifer, thank you for bringing all these amazing people together. And that's it for our panel.
Thank you all so much.
This was a riveting conversation. I think that we had so many questions from our live audience that we couldn't get to, but we'll share that with our featured panelists, and we'll post that post-event recap. So just not to worry, we'll get your questions answered. But no, thank you, Palumi, Tarisai, Nana, and Nasozi for such an inspiring and empowering conversation of how Black women's stories matter, and it's just a beautiful thing to witness. And but I'll let you all go to enjoy the rest of your sunny day and wonderful weekend. And again, happy Women's History Month. Thank you so much for being part of this.
Likewise.
Everyone.
Thank you all.
you.
Bye bye.
All right. So for our next session, we are going to be starting in just under 4 minutes. So if you want to hang tight, and we'll be back shortly.